A little bit about me just before we get started. So I'm an alcohol-free performance coach. I do that full time. I also do some corporate speaking as well. This is me up until about 4.5 years ago. So I was a pretty regular drinker. I wasn't an alcoholic or anything like that. I used to drink what you would consider socially acceptable amounts. So probably around about a few beers most evenings, a bit of a binge at the weekend, that kind of thing. I should probably explain the picture in the middle. That was on my 46th birthday where we went out on a boat, actually this boat here, drinking all day, jumped in the River Thames, couldn't get back on the boat. All very, very embarrassing. But probably nothing that other people, everyone's done a few embarrassing things when they've had a few too many drinks. But what I'm trying to get to is that I wasn't somebody who was sort of sat around on a park bench drinking vodka out of a paper bag at 9 o'clock in the morning or anything like that. It was normal sort of socially acceptable amounts. But I started to find as I was getting older, particularly when I kind of hit midlife, around about 40, that kind of enjoyment I was getting from alcohol as a kid when I was in my sort of 20s and even 30s was starting to change. So it was funny, I was waking up at sort of 3 a.m. with anxiety, feeling like I'm not sure I want to carry on doing this for the rest of my life. I felt that it was kind of, I found it quite difficult to sort of exercise regularly, kind of really knew I had to do exercise, but found it a bit of a chore. My diet was quite inconsistent. I was addicted to my wife, Chris, quite a lot when we'd be out on Saturday night, as I'm sure she'll attest to. And I just kind of felt that, is this really doing, what's the benefit that it's giving me? And I kind of asked myself the question, is alcohol making my life better or is it making it worse? And I came to the conclusion that it was the latter. So my message really is you don't have to be an alcoholic to take a break from alcohol. You don't have to hit some kind of mythical rock bottom to want to improve your overall health and other aspects of your life. But I think there's a real stigma in society that if you don't drink, then you must have been formerly an alcoholic. Like I say, I've been alcohol-free for 4.5 years, and when I say to people I don't drink, I can kind of see in the back of their minds, all right, okay, you had a bit of a problem, did you? But it really wasn't like that at all. It was just a decision that I made. And I'm really glad that I did because it's completely transformed my life. I'm doing this professionally now. Come from a sales background, a corporate career, but taking a break from alcohol and ultimately stopping drinking altogether has just improved so many areas of my life. So if it's not just for alcoholics, then who actually are we speaking to? The term that I use is middle lane drinking. So just to define a little bit more what middle lane drinking actually is, we tend to sort of think about drinking as being very binary, very black and white. So you're either an alcoholic or you're having a great time like everybody else. But realistically, how alcohol affects people is similar to mental health. It's on a spectrum. So middle lane sits between dependency, which is, again, what you'd refer to as an alcoholic, which is about 1% of the population, about 500,000 people. And on the other side, you've got people who are completely alcohol-free, who don't drink at all for whatever reason, like myself. And that's 10 million people in the UK. It's 19% of the population. So it's quite a lot. So everybody else kind of fits into this middle lane bracket. But you're probably thinking, well, yeah, but my granny drinks a glass of sherry on Christmas Day. Does that make her a middle lane drinker? And realistically, it probably doesn't. So to kind of add a bit more meat on the bones, if you like, and focus it in a little bit more, if we look at, for example, people who are drinking more than the government's recommended 14 units of alcohol a week. There was a parliamentary report that came out last year that stated that 23% of the population, when surveyed, admit that they drink more than 14 units a week. Normally, when people are surveyed about their drinking habits, they tend to obviously naturally downplay it. The other thing, obviously, to mention with this as well is 14 units is largely an arbitrary number because if you go to other countries, say you go to America, it's 24. You go to Canada, it's 3 units a week. In the UK, it's 14. So really, what does it actually mean? But what I'm getting at is that 14 units a week isn't really a great deal. It's 14 units a week is about bottom half of wine in a week. So I won't ask people to put their hands up and say how much they drink, but I'd imagine most of us would drink more than that. I certainly was probably drinking about 2 to 3 times that on a normal week. So that's kind of how I'm defining middle lane drinking. And this is really who this presentation is aimed at, regular people. So what we're going to cover today is going to be a 3-point agenda. Quite simple, really. The first one is all of the gains of taking a break from alcohol. The second one is what you're actually losing, because let's say, for example, you take a month off, you're theoretically giving something up, or you're stopping doing something, or you're stopping doing something that you feel has value to you. So we're going to look a little bit at that. And then the third part is going to be about how do you pull it all together and how do you make dry January or any break at any time of year really work for you so that it doesn't really require loads of mental energy and loads of willpower. So actually turning it into something that's enjoyable. So part one, what am I gaining? Got quite a bold statement here, but I'm going to try and back it up over the next few slides. Taking a break from alcohol can be the single biggest intervention we can make to improve virtually every aspect of our lives. Now that is a pretty big statement, but I'd like you to consider this. Imagine you had more time, had more energy, improved your sleep, had better mental health, improved your productivity and focus, felt more motivated, felt a lot less anxious, nourished your body more, reduced the symptoms of menopause, were more present for your family, were your authentic self all of the time, had more money, improved your overall health, and felt happier most days. That's a pretty big, expansive list, but all of that comes with just from taking a month off alcohol. And even more so if you turn it into a longer break, maybe sort of 60 or 90 days. So it's a lot. But when we look at it in terms of what I call the big domino, the big domino is like a keystone habit. So what do I mean by a keystone habit? A keystone habit is a habit that impacts many other areas of your life. So let me give you an example. Let's take middle lane drinking. Well, what are the knock-on effects of middle lane drinking? It could be inconsistent diet. When I was a middle lane drinker, I'd find that, I'd probably eat more kebabs than I would do normally. I'd have more bacon sandwiches the next day. I know what a good diet was. I know what good nutrition was, but I wasn't really doing it all the time. It was kind of, no one craves a quinoa salad when they've got a hangover. To be entirely honest, you're not eating many plates of vegetables when you've got a hangover. And if you've got a hangover, even if you don't even have to have a hangover, but even if you've had a couple of drinks, you don't really want to eat good food because your body's craving carbs. An inconsistent diet can lead to weight gain. Weight gain generally is associated with a lack of exercise, and a lack of exercise really impacts anxiety and depression. And because obviously one of the main benefits of exercise is on your mental health, it makes you feel great. Anxiety and depression can lead to poor sleep. Poor sleep can make you tired and irritable. That in turn leads to low energy, which can make you snappy, and that can lead to arguments with friends and family. So you can kind of see the downstream effects that even moderate drinking can have. I like to talk a lot about the 4 pillars of health and wellness and the impact that alcohol has on the 4 pillars of health and wellness. So what are the 4 pillars of health and wellness? This is quite well established. Diet and nutrition is the first one, exercise and moving your body, sleep, and then mental well-being. And what alcohol does is really impacts all 4 of these. And part of the reason, part of how it does that, particularly with diet and exercise, is consistency. So any personal trainer will tell you the most important thing when it comes to exercise is just showing up. Just show up if you're going to go 4 days a week, show up 4 days a week. When you get there, you tend to sort of stay for a little while, but just going and keeping that habit going is the most important thing. Diet is exactly the same. I kind of spoken a second ago about a lot of us kind of know what a good diet is, but sort of doing it regularly is what really makes the difference, keeping it consistent. That compounding effect of doing good things over and over again start to build compound interest. I spoke earlier about weight loss. So what a lot of people don't realize is that taking a break from alcohol, particularly a prolonged break from alcohol, the weight can just fall off you. It's so much easier to lose weight when alcohol isn't in the mix. And part of the reason that happens is that we have kind of evolved as a species to store calories that we take in from food as fat. So, back in the days when we were hunter-gatherers and, we'd managed to catch an animal, for example, and we would store that excess calories as weight, as fat that we could utilize during the winter months when food was more scarce. Of course, that's not relevant nowadays because we have refrigeration and things like that. But alcohol, calories that we take from alcohol, our body cannot store as fat. They have to be burnt straight away. So this is why, if you look at a traditional heavy drinker, I'm picturing Alex Ferguson, maybe with kind of red sort of veins on the nose. That is alcohol calories escaping as heat because, again, they can't be stored. They have to be burned. So if you're quite sedentary, your body will burn alcohol calories as heat. It's another reason why you get a bit flushed when you've had a couple of drinks. It's heat escaping. So what does all this mean? So great, you're saying that calories from alcohol have to be burned, so I don't store them as fat. Well, that's good news, isn't it? Well, it is, but what it does mean is that the calories you're taking from food get pushed down the priority order in terms of what gets burnt. So if you're taking in 1,500 units of calories from alcohol and 1,500 calories from food, the 1,500 from the alcohol are going to go first, and then you'll move on to the food, which means you will be storing those calories that you've taken in from food. So that's the impact of taking alcohol out of the mix in terms of weight loss. My own personal journey, I wasn't particularly overweight. I mean, you can see that picture's taken from the upside, which is never a good one. But I lost about 15 pounds in about 2 months, literally by stopping drinking, doing nothing else. And it really can have quite a profound effect on weight. Exercise, as I mentioned earlier, it really is about consistency with exercise. What a lot of people will do as well, particularly when they've had a few drinks at the weekend, they might think, well, I'll go to the gym on a Sunday and I'll sweat it out and I'll net off the effect of the alcohol by putting in a really good session in the gym. The reality is it doesn't work like that. When you're working out with alcohol in your system, your performance level is way, way low. You're putting excess stress on your cardiovascular system as well, because your body is dealing with the toxins from the alcohol, so you're not going to put in a good performance to the gym. So you're actually better off resting and recovering if you've been drinking rather than going to the gym. So again, it's that consistency piece that's really, really important on diet and exercise. Sleep. So I've got sleep in here as like the third thing that I'm talking about within the 4 pillars, but really sleep is the most important one. There's a lot more research coming out now about sleep and how important it is, and it is absolutely foundational to health. And the reality is that alcohol is like a wrecking ball to sleep. You're probably thinking, yeah, but I have a few drinks, I fall asleep, no problem. What's the issue? The issue is that it sedates us. It doesn't put us to sleep. We sleep in 4 stages. The first one is light sleep, where you're just kind of like dozing and you're just falling asleep. You're really kind of like low-level sleep. But then we move into deep sleep and rapid eye movement sleep. And those second 2 stages are what's called restorative sleep. And that's the time of the night where our brains and bodies actually kind of clean up the mess from the previous day. So particularly mentally and our cognitive system, some of the problems that we've got from the previous day, our subconscious will actually problem solve a lot of those when we're asleep. That's what happens in rapid eye movement sleep. But even a glass of wine or a couple of beers can prevent us getting into rapid eye movement sleep. We generally tend to sort of sleep in, we cycle through this about sort of 6 to 7 times a night in around about 90-minute sort of cycles. And what tends to happen with alcohol and alcoholism in our system is we tend to spend a lot more time in light sleep and not very much time in REM sleep. And that has a really big knock-on effect on our mental health. Because what happens when we're in rapid eye movement sleep is, as I was saying, our brains and bodies problem solve a lot of the issues that we've got from the previous day. So to give you an example, you might have gone to bed sort of thinking something on your mind, not quite sure how to solve it, not quite sure what the solution is. And you wake up the next morning and the first thing you think about is, oh yeah, I know, I've got the solution to whatever that problem was. When you've got alcohol in your system, that doesn't really happen because you're not getting into rapid eye movement sleep very often. So people get into a lot of issues with just problems accumulating because you're not giving your subconscious time to sort of solve those problems. And that, mental health, when we talk about mental health, from an alcohol point of view, stress, anxiety, depression, these are all things that are very well established as being connected to alcohol, but yet we don't really talk about alcohol in the same breath as mental health. If you work for a company or you have any experience of mental health in the workplace, every company in the world will tell you how important mental health is and how they support their staff with mental health, but alcohol's not really ever in the mix when people talk about mental health. And that's something that kind of concerns me quite a lot. Menopause. I spoke about menopause earlier. So alcohol and menopause is a curious one because there was a report issued by the NHS last year that said the highest drinking sector of the population is women in their 50s. And what happens during menopause, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, is that the brain is going through a lot of hormonal changes. And what happens with alcohol is a hormone disruptor. So what happens when we drink alcohol is our brains and our bodies are always trying to get back into what's called homeostasis, which is hormone balance. So anything that we do, our bodies will always try and get us back to a level state. So if we're cold, we'll start to shiver to to generate heat, to warm us up. It brings us back into balance. If we're hot, we start to sweat because that's the way in which our bodies kind of cool down. So again, we're always trying to get into balance. And with alcohol, it is literally like pouring petrol on a bonfire, because you're already going through a lot of hormonal changes, and a lot of the symptoms of menopause that we put in the menopause bucket disappear when alcohol's not in the mix. Things like IBD or sleep problems, hot flushes, weight gain. All of these things can be lessened when alcohol's not part of the mix. But a lot of the time, we're thinking about alcohol as being something that helps with menopause, but the exact opposite is happening. When we look at these 4 pillars, the reality is when alcohol's not in the mix, they are all strengthened. And it sounds a bit cliche, and I hate to say this, but it really is like a superpower in terms of, from a health perspective, when alcohol's not in the mix anymore. So I've spoken a lot about health. In fact, I've only spoken about health so far, but there's a lot more to taking a break from alcohol than just health. Your energy levels after a few weeks without alcohol go through the roof. I coach people one-to-one who are taking a break from alcohol, and most people report this after a couple of weeks. They just feel fantastic and they've got tons more energy. And then you've got the kind of the work side of it. I do a lot of work with corporations, talking to staff. The benefits of encouraging staff who are middle-aged drinking to take a break in terms of productivity, focus. It reduces presenteeism. People showing up at work and basically not doing a whole great deal because they're like, I can't be bothered today, it's Monday morning. Or absenteeism, people not showing up because of hangovers. The company culture side, in terms of, a lot of younger people nowadays don't drink. So 39% of under 25-year-olds report that they don't drink at all, which blows my mind as someone who grew up in the 90s. So you've got this kind of, older people drinking a lot more, younger people drinking a lot less. So you've got a kind of a divided kind of company culture there as well. And then there's the money side. So whenever I give this talk, I always give this example of the money that I used to spend on alcohol, and I spend it here. So, I've been here a member for a few years. I think actually when I joined, I'd already stopped drinking, but my bar bill pays for my Pennyhill membership. So I spend, 4 or 5 days a week, in the swimming pool, in the sauna, doing things that actually make me feel really good and are good for my health, as opposed to, spending it on wine and beer. And then you've got 2 things that I think are really important, and that's connection. So if you're a parent, I work quite a lot with people who've got kids and who want to change their kind of drinking habits. And what I hear an awful lot is, I want to be more present for my kids. Sunday morning, you've been out and had a few drinks, you've got the kids piling in the room at still sort of 6:30, jumping on the bed, and you're like, oh, just leave me alone, And Christmas is one that we talk a lot about as well. And, if you've got younger children and they're maybe, 5 to 15, those kind of 10-year period is kind of golden for a lot of parents, and you want to be making most of that. And then there's your partner, and my wife Chris will tell you, hopefully I'm a lot better husband, since I kicked the alcohol into touch, because a lot of the times I wasn't always really present. We'd go out and I'd kind of be thinking, when am I going to get a drink? When I go to the bar, and you kind of almost sit in your own head a little bit. We go to the theatre, and I'd just be sort of planning when I was going to get a pint, or what pub we were going to go to afterwards, and starting little arguments just because you're a little bit snarky because you've had a few drinks. It's not the same for everybody. Not everyone behaves in that way, but I think I've become a better husband since I kind of took alcohol out of the mix. And the last one is, I'm part of a community of people who don't drink, and everyone has had a similar experience to it that I have. That they just say, I'm just so much happier all the time. Sounds a bit strange, but a friend of my wife Chris's, she stopped drinking about a year before I did, and I met her when we were in Amsterdam, actually, about 6 months into her doing this, and I was still drinking at the time. And I was really curious. I was like, "How are you dealing with it?" Because she was quite a big boozer, and she said, "I just feel happy all the time," and that really struck me. And I thought, "Wow, that is amazing. I really want to do that." And I've never really forgotten that. So just stopping one thing sometimes can unlock everything. It's not just all about health; it's about all these other things that I've spoken about before. So that's part one. That's all the stuff that you kind of gain from taking a prolonged break. But what are you losing? What are you giving up? I'm going to ask you just to grab your phones again for a second. And I'm going to do another very short poll. Done that one. So the question is, what do you like most about alcohol? And again, I'd like you to choose one if you can. And the options are: it helps me socialise and connect with others, helps me relax and unwind, it's fun, gives me confidence, helps me sleep, or I like the taste. Oof, things are changing. Oh, it's my favourite one. Oh, wow. I like the taste. Right. I might upset a few people in a minute. It ranks based on the results. Okay, so number one is I like the taste, and we're going to talk about all these ones in a second. Oh, thank God for that! It's been bumped off the top. Helps me relax and unwind. I like the taste. Helps me socialise. I'm glad no one ticked it. Helps me sleep, because I think we've already put that one to bed, so to speak. Great. Everyone done? Brilliant. Okay, we shall we'll unpack some of these now, one at a time. Okay, it helps me socialise, according to David Beckham and Matt Damon. I've kind of gone off David Beckham because he promotes about 3 different types of alcohol. I'm a bit like, have you not got enough money? Come on. So it helps me socialise. Now, this traditionally, certainly with the people that I work with, this is the one that comes up the most in terms of, but I don't want to go out and everyone's going to be like, oh, why aren't you having a drink? Everyone else is drinking, and it's really great, and you're a bit boring, and all this kind of thing. And people feel like it's an essential social lubricant. It's required to have a good time when you're out. And that definitely, for me, was the main thing that stopped me going alcohol-free for many, many years. So I love going to live sport. Used to have a season ticket at Everton. Used to go up to Liverpool to watch football all the time. Go to rugby with my friends, and it generally was a day built all around drinking. So 10 hours, 12 hours of drinking. And when I was contemplating going alcohol-free, I just thought, how's that going to work? How is sport going to work? How are my friendship groups going to work? What are we going to do? We're going to go do hot yoga? It's not going to work. Until I tried it. Not the hot yoga. I've never tried that. But I still go to football. I still go to rugby. I still have a great time. But we kind of tell ourselves that the alcohol is the most important, well, not the most important part, but it's an important part, and it helps us connect and it helps us bond. But going back to how we've evolved, like I was speaking about earlier, we naturally get a release of dopamine when we're around people that we like and people we care about, because we're tribal creatures. We've evolved to be part of a tribe, part of a group, because that's how we procreate, and it's also protection for us historically. So we are naturally hardwired to feel good when we're around people that we like. But nowadays, invariably, alcohol is in the mix as well. So sometimes we sort of think, well, yeah, that alcohol is part of that. It has to be part of that. But one thing that I've noticed, an awful lot, and some other people that I've worked with have as well, is that only really takes place in the first hour and a half, before the alcohol really starts to kick in. If you're out in a pub for say 3 or 4 hours and you're not drinking and you're kind of watching what's going on, you can kind of see how the night goes. The first hour and a half, it's two-way conversations, people enjoying each other's company, and then you get to a point, maybe 3 or 4 pints in, maybe half a bottle of wine, all of a sudden it changes. People start getting louder and no one's really listening, and it all kind of gets a little bit out of hand. And that's where the sort of social connection kind of disappears. And one of the things that concerned me about kind of stopping drinking was, well, I'm just not going to be able to stay in the pub for 5 or 6 hours at a time with all my friends, because what am I going to do? But actually, after a couple of hours, when everything starts to change, there's not really a huge amount of value after that. So you're not really missing out on anything, and that was certainly my experience. And now I've kind of got used to not drinking. It's not something that I miss in the slightest in social situations. I still go out, still have a great time. I don't stay in the pub for 5 or 6 hours at a time, but that doesn't bother me anymore. But my real relationships with my best friends haven't changed in the slightest. In fact, they've got better, because I feel like I'm more connected to them. I don't feel terrible the next day, and I just feel like I'm a better friend. So the social side is something that we really tell ourselves as being critically important, or a lot of us do, but it really isn't always like that. And when you try it and you test it and you go out and you get used to it, it's a little bit awkward at first, but after a while you kind of come to realise that actually it doesn't really make any difference if alcohol's there or not. The next one is helps me relax. And The reality is it does the exact opposite. Alcohol increases our cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone, so it actually makes us more stressed. Now, I know what you're thinking, yeah, but I have I get home, have a glass of wine, have a beer, feel relaxed. And actually, you're right, you do. For about 20 minutes, we do feel relaxed because alcohol stimulates our dopamine receptors and makes us feel good. But as I was saying about earlier in the menopause slide, when I was talking about homeostasis, our body is always trying to get into balance. So when our body senses that there is too much dopamine in our system, it releases a counterweight, which is a chemical called dynorphin. And what dynorphin does is it basically balances out the dopamine. Dynorphin is essentially a mood suppressant. It brings us down. But dynorphin stays in our system for about 8 to 10 hours. So if you're drinking 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, the dynorphin is still in your system up until around about lunchtime the next day. And that's exactly why sometimes we feel anxious on a hangover, or we feel kind of anxiety, is the expression. That is the amount of dynorphin that is in our system. It's also the reason why after we've had that first drink, the first 20 minutes, the first half an hour, that's always the best. You always feel great because the dopamine's going through your system, there's no dynorphin, and you feel brilliant. But you can never get that one back again. You tend to be sort of chasing it throughout the rest of the evening, trying to get back to that feeling you had after the one beer. So yeah, it does relax you, it does chill you out for about 20 minutes. And sometimes I compare it to a payday loan. So you get the money straight away, but you pay a very high rate of interest for it for quite a long period of time. So we tend to sort of think about alcohol in the moment rather than the longer term. And that's really how it is with relaxation. And the next one I was spoken about was it gives you confidence. Confidence that we get from alcohol is the result of how alcohol affects our brain. So one of the first things that alcohol does is it depresses the functioning of our prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for risk aversion, decision making, and impulsive behavior. So this is why people get into trouble when they've had a few drinks. It might be as serious as getting behind the wheel of a car, or getting into an unmarked taxi cab, or go to bed with someone that you wouldn't normally do. But it might be something that's as straightforward as smoking when you've had a couple of drinks. A lot of people will be like, "Well, I don't smoke until I've had a beer," things like that. And it's because our decision making, our judgment is kind of offline. When we speak about alcohol being a depressant, that means it slows down the functioning of, not necessarily depressant in terms of sad, it means it slows down. And that's what happens to the prefrontal cortex. And that's a lot of time why we suddenly feel, I'm really confident, I don't really care. That's why. But really what is happening is you're not fully in control of, your brain's partly offline. And that isn't really real confidence, in my view. Helps me sleep. I'm not going to dwell on this. I think we've done enough. It doesn't. It's sedation, not sleep. It's two different things. And the last one, so I like the taste. Sometimes there's a room full of people who'll say yes to this. Sometimes there's nobody. But I'm going to give you my opinion on this. And some people agree with it. Some people don't. You don't like the taste. You only think you do. And let me tell you why I think that. So when you first tried a glass of wine or a beer, how did it taste? Were you like, oh, I love that. Yeah, I'll have another one. I'll have another glass of wine, please. Or were you like, oh, it's disgusting. I can't stand that. Any kind of alcohol, particularly with wine. Wine's the one that people are the most passionate about in terms of, I do like the taste. I love that smoky, oaky taste, aroma. I mean, what does oak taste like? I understand that. But the point is people can get quite passionate about, particularly with wine. And what actually is happening with the taste is, it's something that we have to acquire. Would everyone go along with that? It's a taste that you kind of acquire over time. If you think about when you were younger, when you first had alcohol, our body's natural response to alcohol, because it's a toxin, is to reject it in the same way it would do with poisonous berries or anything else. We have a very attuned sense of taste through our evolution, and our bodies know that alcohol is damaging to us. But it's in complete contrast to what we see in the world around us. So when you're younger and you're growing up, you see your parents, you see everyone basically drinking, having a fantastic time, but that's not what you were experiencing. So there's cognitive dissonance there in terms of you're feeling a certain way, but it's not consistent with what your senses are seeing. So we push through that. And quite often what gets told to children by their parents is, oh, don't drink that now. That's for adults. That's an adult drink. You can have that when you grow up. So we're already putting it into people's heads as being something that's aspirational that you get to do when you're an adult. So we really kind of push through and we acquire the taste over time, which basically removes the cognitive dissonance and brings us, again, as part of the group. We become part of the tribe because everybody else is doing it, we're doing it. And a lot of the other effects that we've spoken about in terms of stress and relaxation that happens in the moment, our brains know that when we have alcohol, it's going to make us feel good in the moment. Our subconscious doesn't work on the long term, how you're going to feel the next day. It works on the moment. So the taste really is to direct us to have something that our subconscious thinks that we need. It doesn't recognize the longer downstream effects of it. So that's kind of what is going on with taste. I can see I've lost a few people, but that's, like I say, that's my opinion on it. There's quite a lot of science behind that as well. The other thing I think with taste as well is you may be familiar, I hear a lot of stories about blind taste tests with wine where people can't tell the difference between a £200 bottle and your local Lidl bottle. You can actually go one step further than that in that because sight is our primary sense, it's basically a coin flip when people are blindfolded to whether or not they can actually tell the difference between white and red. Because when we see the glass, when we drink it, our brains have already decided what the taste is going to be. And when you put a blindfold on, it's literally a 50-50 coin flip as to whether people can actually tell the difference between white and red. There's a little bit of that in there, yeah. Well, yeah, you mean obviously sugar's in virtually everything nowadays as well. You can apply that to pretty much everything. It's a complex issue, and I don't think there is a definitive answer on it. But it's certainly before I stopped drinking altogether, I took 4 months off drinking at one point. And I remember we were in Abu Dhabi and I was at a bar and I decided, I'm going to have a beer. I've had 4 months off. I deserve this. And I sat there with this beer thinking, this is going to be the best beer ever. I've earned this. And I drank it and I was like, that doesn't taste right. There's something not. And I was a bit like, And it took about 2 weeks for that taste to kind of go away, for me to reacquire the taste. And I worked with one chap who had stopped drinking for 2 years and then gone back to it and kind of regretted that he did it. And I said, what happened with taste when you hadn't had a drink for 2 years? What did wine taste like? And he said, petrol. So there's definitely something there. It's not quite as straightforward. And the third part is, how do you put it all together? How do you make taking a break from alcohol, whether it's in dry January or whenever, how do you make it really work for you? So the most important thing is what's called selective attention. And I'm going to show you a quick video. Just bear with me for 1 second on selective attention. I don't know if anyone's been watching The Traitors. Has anyone been watching The Traitors? Did you happen to see the Ed Gamble podcast show last night? Because he actually referenced this video. And I said to Chris, that's in my presentation. Bear with me 1 sec. I'm going to get a YouTube advert now, aren't I? So this will give you an idea of what selective attention is.
Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball.
Some people might have seen this.
How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
Some people see it, some people don't. It's quite a famous video. It's used quite a lot.
This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
Oh, sorry, I didn't pay for that.
It is available for use in talks, training, and teaching on DVDs from VizCog Productions.
Or for free on YouTube.
Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
Oh, hang on a sec. So that's selective attention. So you're probably thinking, well, what the hell's that got to do with alcohol? Well, when it comes to taking a break from alcohol, selective attention is really important because what we tend to do is focus on what we haven't got. And that's true in any sort of situation. We're always a bit like, oh, I haven't got that. I really want this. Whereas, as I spoke about in the first section, the benefits of taking a break from alcohol are absolutely enormous. but we don't really tend to sort of focus on those. We focus on, I can't go out in January, it's going to be miserable, it's going to be really shit. I can't go out, nothing's going to be any fun. And we focus on that, and that becomes kind of quite self-fulfilling. If you just shift your focus away from that onto all of the health benefits, all the life benefits that come with it, it becomes a very, very different experience. What I've got is an example here with the red cars, and you might have heard of this before. If you imagine you decide you're going to go and buy a red car, all of a sudden you start to see red cars on the road all the time, whereas before you didn't really notice it. That's selective attention in action as well. So really it's just about sort of shifting your mindset away from what you haven't got to what you have. And a really good tool for you for doing this is journaling. So I tend to get sort of two responses when I talk about journaling. People are always a bit like, oh yeah, I do that, it's really good, it makes me feel great. And the other response is, what, like a dear diary, like all the other girls beat me up at school today because they found out I was keeping a journal. It's not like that at all. Journaling is really good for your mental health, particularly with regards to alcohol, because you just you're making an inventory every day of how you're feeling. You know, waking up, how do I feel? How well did I sleep last night? Oh, I've slept brilliantly, actually. What kind of energy have I got today? Yeah, I'm feeling pretty buzzed, feeling quite focused, feeling quite productive, and just noting those things down, really solidify it in your brain. And over the days, help you kind of see, actually, I'm making really big progress here, I'm feeling really good, I'm getting a lot of gains from it, rather than it just letting it just kind of come and go in your mind without you paying any real credence to it. I think as human beings as well, we have a real problem with perfection. I use the term perfection is the enemy of progress. So what tends to happen a lot with dry January or any kind of break from alcohol is people will maybe get to the 14th, 15th of the month, done really, really well, and then life happens and shit happens, and they end up going out and having a beer, and they're like, oh, I've ruined it now, forget it. And they just go back to normal. But, if you had one night where you had a drink in January, and then, you got right back on the horse again, it was just that one day in the entire month. At the end of the month, you've done 95% of the time alcohol-free. That's fantastic. And in any other context, 95% in an exam is an amazing result. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It's all about kind of moving forward and progress. So not kind of trashing the whole thing, just when you've had a bit of a slip, but just getting back to it. Habit loops. So a habit loop, for anyone who's not familiar, we have thousands of habit loops, whether it's brushing our teeth, tying our shoes. With alcohol, they all work the same, but with alcohol, we have a cue, craving, reward, response and reward. So in the situation with alcohol, it might be, I walk in the door at 5 o'clock, if that's a busy day, I feel like a beer. That's the craving. You go to the fridge, you have the beer, that's the response. You feel relaxed for 20 minutes, that's the reward. And that really gets kind of locked in. But we can change our habit loops by just changing the response element. So one of the things that works for me, I still do exactly the same thing, but I have an alcohol-free beer rather than a normal beer. And that still maintains the same habit loop because I still feel a reward after I've done it. And you can't remove habit loops, but you can change them. I'll recommend a book in a minute that kind of gives you a bit more reading on this. It's quite useful. I mentioned about cravings there. Cravings are very, very common in terms of any break from alcohol. And what cravings are is our brain obviously telling us you need to go and get that thing that we want. And I use the analogy quite often of walking through a field. I go out and walk my dogs every day, and take a path like this that's very well established. If you were to kind of go off that path and walk kind of along here through where it's really, really long grass, it's going to feel like a lot of effort, and it's going to be like, I could just be walking over there where it's really, really easy. Our brains are fantastic energy saving devices. Again, what I was saying about earlier in terms of how we've evolved, one of the reasons that we've survived so long and flourished as a species is our ability to save energy. Historically, energy has been something that's very, very hard for us to get, and our brains will always go to the path of least resistance, where there is less friction and less energy is involved for us to do things. The other reason we have cravings is our brains naturally are there to protect us, and our brains will always default to what it knows. So our subconscious will drive us towards what it knows because it knows that's safe, that it knows what's going to happen. And if we're not drinking, our brain's a bit like, yeah, I'm not sure, we're not used to that, we don't know what's going to happen in that space, let's just stick to what we know. So there's two things happening there, and that's really what drives a lot of our cravings. Plan your time's a really, really big one. One thing I used to find an awful lot when I was drinking was if I was bored, I'd probably think, I'm going to have a beer, because I'm a bit bored, there's nothing to do. And if you're somebody who likes to drink regularly at the weekends or in the evenings, just ripping that out and not putting something else there is kind of problematic because you're a bit like, I don't really know what to do now. I don't know where to go. So a little bit of planning in terms of, what am I going to do at the weekend rather than go to the pub. Perhaps you go for a swim at Pennyhill, go for a walk in the woods or wherever it may be, is a really important thing to do. It's a good strategy. Don't lock yourself away. The problem with dry January that I find, I'll be quite honest, I'm not actually a big fan of dry January because it's only a month. And certainly what I've found in the people that I work with and I coach is that when you get to the end of January, you've done a month and you feel pretty good, but it really is just the tip of the iceberg. It's only just seeing what's behind the curtain. When you go into like 60 or even 90 days, that's when it really starts to get really, really good and you really see huge benefits. Whereas in January, you can kind of almost like white knuckle it for a month. No one's really goes out in January. Everyone's got their credit card bills, the weather's crap, and you can kind of hide yourself away for the month. Whereas if you go out and actually try socializing without alcohol and kind of get used to it, it's a bit like building a muscle. It feels a bit awkward at first, but when you do it a bit more, it becomes a lot more normal. So for me, who's been alcohol free for 4.5 years, I'm kind of used to it. I don't feel, weird in social situations. So the more you do it, the more natural it becomes. There is a bit of driving. Yeah. Sometimes I might be the one who's driving. I'll normally drive anyway because it means I can leave when I want. Well, it's an interesting one you say that in terms of when people clock you're not drinking, because a lot of people have a fear that everyone's going to be like, well, you're not drinking, and they're going to get a hard time about it. But the reality is, no one really cares about you. People just care about themselves, and they may notice for a couple of minutes that, oh, right, he's not drinking today, and then they're off. It doesn't enter their heads again. Whereas we sort of tend to, we're very inward focusing, thinking, oh, everyone's going to be looking at me. It's a bit like when if you're on a dance floor at a wedding or something, you're very, very self-conscious, but so is everyone else. Everyone else is just like self-absorbed, and that's how it is a lot of the time with alcohol. It's no one really, they might notice at first, they're like, oh, that's novel, whatever. And then they just get on with their drinking. So it doesn't really happen. I think it depends on who it is. In my experience, if I'm out at a social event with people I don't really know, then yeah, I do feel a bit, okay, that guy's getting on my nerves because he's pissed and I'm not. But if I'm out with friends and I've known them for a long, long time, it doesn't really bother me at all. They're just my friends. And
Generally fine when you're not drinking. If you're not there for the whole night anyway, so it tends to happen. If we went to a wedding, else is there until the I don't have enough alcohol in my system to not feel the pain. So, and we're tired, so we go, and everyone else stays. Then they all call you boring. Well, we don't often get boring because I'd say your real self comes out, and you're far more interesting talking to somebody that's a bottle and a half in. They're not very, so we tend to be able to hold a conversation. So yeah,
I think what you were saying there is a bit like our perception of what people are going to say in social situations, where you said, oh yeah, but I'm boring. But that, in coaching terms, that's what we call a limiting belief. That's something that you believe to be true, but I would suggest that, has anyone actually said to you when you're not drinking, you're already boring? That's what you perceive that people are going to say, but people don't actually say that.
Get on the dance
floor. A lot of the time with alcohol as well is that if you let's say you are in a pub and people are a bit like, no, I'm going to drink, come on, just have one. That really is a reflection on somebody. People feel a bit like, what the people are seeing is, are you saying to me that I can't have a drink? And that makes people sometimes feel a little bit awkward. It's not really about what you're doing. It's about what you're implying that they should or shouldn't be doing, which is not the case, but it tends to be a bit like holding a mirror up to people. And in social situations, explore the alternatives. So again, I'm going to make some assumptions. everyone in this room most people in this room are around about my age. You will remember the days where there weren't good alcohol-free alternatives. So the days of Caliber and Beck's Blue don't seem that long ago, but they are about 30 years ago. It's very different now. If you've never really drunk any alcohol-free alternatives, you're missing out, because there is some fantastic alcohol-free drinks across the board. Don't let people tell you that all the wine's rubbish, because there are some really good alcohol-free wines. I've tried them. But beers, I mean, Guinness Zero is absolutely flying at the moment. It's a fantastic product. It's just like regular Guinness. Lucky Saint is an absolutely brilliant lager. You're starting to see it on tap all over the place. Well, so that's an interesting one. So it is 0.5%. You're absolutely right, but 0.5% alcohol is what you'll find in a banana or a brioche bun. So our bodies process that amount of alcohol pretty much as soon as we consume it. So it's literally impossible to get any kind of buzz from drinking 10 bottles of Lucky Saint. I've not tried it, but your body metabolizes it quicker than you can consume it. If you think about 0.5%, that's 10 bottles would be equivalent of 1 bottle of Budweiser. So our bodies clear that very, very, very quickly. So I drink 0.5% beers because it really doesn't register. But there's things like the drinks, but there's some great things like Seedlip, which is like a kind of a malt gin. But even outside of sort of traditional kind of drinks like this, you've got things like kombuchas and CBD drinks, Dash, and there's so many. And go on. Yeah, we had it on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day.
That one is a wild title.
The really important role that they play is they allow you to keep the ritual. So drinking is all about rituality. It's all about cheers, and if I'm stood there with a pint of Guinness Zero in my hand with a group of blokes at a rugby match, what's the difference? One's got a different chemical in it to the rest of it. What's the difference? So you can still have that ritualistic thing. You're not stood there with a well, beer that doesn't have alcohol in it I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a health drink. There's nothing bad in it. It's very, very low sugar, or a lot of them are quite low sugar. Lucky Saint certainly is. It's got organic ingredients. There's nothing really inherently bad about beer. It's low. It's only, I think I'd have to double check. The sugar content's quite low in it. So, some of them really do fluctuate. You do have to sort of check the label a little bit. There's a couple of alcohol-free beers that are like a can of Coke, but so a lot of them are quite low in sugar. But
you don't get high off that?
No, well, no more than you would do from eating the equivalent sugar in any other kind of. No, there's no kind of. I don't know. Do you get high off a biscuit? I feel like I'm busy. But it's worth trying them out. It really is worth trying them out. Just as we come to the end, I kind of wanted to make a couple of recommendations on things that really kind of helped my journey, was reading and listening to podcasts. So there are so many great books about alcohol out there nowadays. It's generally referred to as Quit Lit, but these are some fantastic ones. So The Unexpected Joy of Being Sober by Catherine Gray is kind of a memoir. Catherine Gray is around about her mid-40s. She was a bit of a hellraiser when she was younger, and she's really, really funny. This Naked Mind is kind of a bit like, by Annie Grace, it's a bit like NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. I don't know if anyone's heard of Alan Carr, who did the Quit Smoking, but not the comedian. It's delivered in a way that kind of makes you really sort of think about what alcohol's actually doing and changes your mindset a little bit. Similar with Alcohol Explained, which is a bit more sciencey, but they're really fantastic books that give you a very different perspective. And Atomic Habits is one I referenced earlier there. Very, very well-known book. James Clear talks a lot about habit loops and about how our neuroscience works in terms of why we crave things and how to kind of change our environment to sort of set us up to win. So these sort of things really can kind of be a big tool in terms of taking a break. And the other one is podcasts. So everyone's doing podcasts these days. These are 4 of my particular favourites. The guy down there, Andy Ramage, I trained with him as a coach. Big Drink Rethink's a really, really good one. And the one on the bottom right there, The Alcohol-Free Revolution, that's my podcast. So if an hour of me talking isn't enough, you can get me at 9 o'clock every Monday morning. delivering a podcast. And the last thing really to say is join others, become part of a community, because outside of dry January, certainly in other parts of the year, going alcohol free for any kind of period of time can feel quite isolating, because we do have this perception that everybody else is drinking and I'm not. The reality is a lot of people don't drink. Like I say, 10 million people in the UK don't, but we kind of feel that we're the only ones that are left out, and that can be quite jarring. Again, going back to feeling like we're not part of the tribe, we're not part of the group. So we can find communities everywhere, online. The Alcohol Free Revolution podcast, we have a community. We do a Zoom call every week where we just get together and sort of celebrate alcohol-free lifestyle. And, we have people at various stages. Some have taken a break for a few weeks, some a month, some for years. And, getting together with other people who have a similar life experience can be really empowering, makes you feel more part of a group. And just to finish on, so like I said, my name's James Lloyd. I'm an alcohol-free coach. If anyone is ever in a situation where they want to kind of a bit more support with taking a break, going alcohol-free, one of the things you get from a coach is clarity, perspective, and accountability. And that's something that you really can't kind of get on your own. And I'm available. I post every day on LinkedIn, lots of alcohol insights, Instagram, and of course my podcast there that I mentioned a moment ago. So my last slide really is, if you are doing dry January or taking a break, congratulations, it's a brilliant thing to do. But what happens on the 1st of February? Do you think, oh, thank God that's over, I can go back and have a drink now? It's one of the reasons why I don't like dry January, because, like I say, the real magic happens around about sort of 60 to 90 days. And if you are doing dry January, and as the poll that we did earlier showed, most people are doing it for health reasons. So if you're doing it for health reasons, January is only 8% of the year. So you've obviously identified that drinking is something that's perhaps not necessarily doing you much good from a health perspective. Why go back and do it for 92% of the year? So maybe it'd be great to sort of think about perhaps doing it for a longer period, because the longer it goes, the better it gets. And I can say that after 4 years, it just gets better and better and better. It really does. And that's almost the end of my talk. I've just got one more slide. I just wanted to say happy 21st wedding anniversary to my wife, Kristen. So it's our wedding anniversary today. So you've got a pretty good wife. I'm spending it with you. What, being married to me for 21 years? Good stuff. Well, yeah. So there we go. Does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to make? Yeah. Sure thing. My Instagram, I'm kind of only just getting up and running at the moment. I've been on LinkedIn for over a year. But yeah, do try out the podcast. It's like I said, we've been going for about 6 months or so. It's myself and another coach. We've had like some absolutely fantastic guests on, and yeah, we release a new episode every Monday. And yeah. Uh-huh.
You get some of those benefits, none of them. Is there
I think I can summarise that in when you go alcohol free, you're making one decision. You're making a binary choice. What I used to find that I used to struggle with, and I know this is true for a great many people, is that when you still have alcohol in the mix, you've always got this question in your head of, am I going to have a drink tonight or am I not? Is it a special occasion or is it not? It's a lot of noise, and that is exhausting. It certainly was for me. I'd always be setting boundaries in terms of, right, I drink at the weekends, and then something would happen on a Friday night, and I'm like, well, I'm going to drink for that. And then a month later, there'd be something on a Thursday, and all of a sudden, you're back to drinking 5 nights a week, or whatever it may be. So I just found it much easier and a lot less tiring just to go, you know what, I'm making a decision and I'm doing it. And the other thing I've kind of found over the years is that it wasn't actually giving me anything. There wasn't any reason to. But it takes, when you've drunk for 30 years, I drank for. I was 46 when I stopped. I drank since I was 18 or whatever. You don't question what it would be like without it, because we tend to have the perception that we're naturally going to be losing something. We're going to have one less thing in our life. But it opens up so many more things that you just didn't notice before. I call it finding joy in the ordinary. So alcohol is a little bit like a really bright light, and then when you switch that light off, all of a sudden you start to notice really sort of smaller lights, or it's a hard way of describing it, but you gain a lot. Oh, I'm absolutely sure it does. I'm sure it's the same. Do you mean yourself or somebody close to you? It's well, I get asked this quite a lot actually. It's unfortunately you can't really sell it to anybody. It's something that people have to arrive at on their own. One thing I found with a lot of my friends over quite a longer period of time is that when you go alcohol free, people naturally see the positive change in you. And I've seen this a lot of work as well with with people in my team, that you just become, I don't want to put anybody off, you just become a bit happier all of the time. And obviously your skin improves, your eyes improve, your hair improves, you lose weight, your appearance, you've got more energy, all of these things that I was talking about. And people tend to notice that over a period of time. And Chris wasn't a big drinker, but we've kind of, you don't really drink now either. And
no, I mean too. I drink. It is definitely a health issue. For me, I'm going through menopause, so sleep is job. I exercise 5 times a week. If I were to drink tonight, I would write all of that off tomorrow, and I'm willing to give that up for 8 drinks. So it just means nothing to me. So if I'm having a drink, if we go to with my birthday, go and I have a glass of champagne. Next day, I was at a spa, I was just relaxing. I wasn't walking my dogs, holding 15 meetings or going to the gym in the evening. I gave that drink meant that I had to give up that next day, but I was quite willing to do that. Whereas during the week, I'm not willing to do that. So, and because and I used to say, when he stopped drinking, I naturally stopped drinking so much. There weren't the occasions where we go out and he's like, right, we don't do that anymore. So my drinking habits. And then also I hear it all the time. Listening to it. But I think also not doing that. If he's not drinking, I'm like, well,
what one thing.
So you just kind of naturally do what you want, but I'm not interested.
These books are actually good. If you just want to signpost somebody, something like Alcohol Explained by William Porter, that's a good place to start, because that gets people thinking about alcohol in a very different way. Yeah. I mean, really, with people that I coach, I normally when I first meet them, I normally recommend either Alcohol Explained or This Naked Mind by Annie Grace. Both are excellent. They're both relatively similar. I tend to find that women tend to gravitate more to Annie Grace, whereas I don't know where I'm actually getting this from, but I tend to give men William Porter and women Annie Grace, but they're both kind of quite similar. They really sort of set out, okay, this is exactly what alcohol is. Regardless of what you think it is and what beliefs you have about alcohol, this is what it actually is, and this is what it's actually doing. And they can. Yeah, the Unexpected Joy of Being Sober is more of a memoir, whereas This Naked Mind and Alcohol Explained. One thing I would say with these is they're very short. If you get them as an audiobook, they're about 6 hours. You can really go through these in a weekend quite easily, but they completely rewired my thinking around alcohol. So that's quite a good place to start. I probably would just signpost them to maybe one of those two. Cool. All good? Thank you so much again for coming. I appreciate you venturing out on such a cold night, cold, wet night.